We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse's Phil Brasher, as well as this week by Mark Dopp with the North American Meat Institute. Mark, we appreciate you joining us.
Happy to be here. Hope everybody's well.
So for starters, hope everything is well with you as well. But obviously, it's been kind of a crescendo here for the last couple of weeks, and things kind of really hit an exclamation point at the Senate Ag Committee hearing on Thursday in regards to some issues that some folks are having with the current state of play within the beef packing sector. The general counsel nominee, right. Janie Hipp, said she'd been in this business for a long time, and there's been that packer and producer consternation for as long as she can remember. It's one of those things that's been kind of swelling for a while, but especially in the last couple of weeks, we're seeing some upswell and some might argue some momentum on this issue. Mark, as someone that's been following this issue for a while, how is the current temperature on this issue different than what we've seen in the past?
Well, first of all, as somebody who's been doing this for, I think I just passed about 37 years now, you're right. This issue of market consideration, challenges associated with market, et cetera, it comes and goes. In fact, I spend most of my days working out of my home office, and I have a stack of quote unquote studies, for lack of a better term, that have been done by academics and USDA, and it's about 3 feet tall. They've been looking at this issue since the 70s. So this is not a new issue. You kind of wonder a little bit whether it's gotten a little hotter because of the pandemic, and people, everybody's a little more excitable perhaps. So, but you're right, there's more interest. It's getting a lot of attention, but it's not the first time these issues have come about. So, I mean, maybe it's just the nature of them. I mean, there are cycles. It comes and goes.
Mark, speaking of the pandemic, what is the industry seeing? What are your members' companies telling you about labor? Are they as we open up now, have they been able to get it up to or close to what they were in terms of processing efficiency before the pandemic?
The consistent theme we hear from the membership, even before the pandemic, is the inability to find enough qualified workers. It is a constant theme, and the pandemic exacerbated that problem. I mean, let's face it. Last March, April, May, June. Like I said, I've been doing this for 37 years. Those are probably the 3, 4, or 5 most difficult months of my career in terms of keeping plants open for a variety of reasons, between state and local health officials, absenteeism, employees that were infected or sick. Just that confluence of circumstances, resulted in what we all saw a year ago. But we still have labor issues. There are still people who are either afraid to come back to work, or in some cases, they don't have the incentive to come back to work. I know the president addressed this a couple of weeks ago, but I don't think there's much doubt that with the supplement, and I think it goes through sometime in September, but the supplement that the federal government is providing in terms of unemployment, there are circumstances in which somebody who's on unemployment in some states can make more money staying at home than they can by going to work. It's just a fact. We had a call with some officials at USDA a couple weeks ago with some of our members, and they pointed out they're paying this amount. And if you add up what the state offers, put on top of that what the feds are offering, the employee makes more money not coming to work. Now that's going to run out, and that job may be there in September, but right now they're not coming, and it's a challenge. And the labor shortage is absolutely affecting our ability to use the capacity to the maximum extent possible. There was an article in the Drover's article I saw this morning that cited labor as one of the key factors for why there is less product, or it's affecting the cost function and everything else. But yes, labor is a key issue.
Speaking again of the pandemic, there was the omnibus bill, I believe, passed in December, included the provisions of what's called the Ramp Up Act to basically provide some grants to small processors to get them up to federal inspection standards. How much impact could that have on processing capacity? And do you all have any particular concerns about how that is done? I'm sure you don't want to say overcapacity.
Well, if you talk about capacity, we have, and on the beef side, if I remember correctly, there are about, in the last 6-8 months, something like that, give or take, we've had announcements from several companies, either to expand existing capacity or to build new facilities. Now, that doesn't happen overnight, nor does it happen overnight to provide grants and loans to these smaller companies, for the most part, to be able to expand their facilities or amend their facilities such that they're able to qualify for federal inspection. And let me say this, I know that there's been a lot of talk about allowing state inspected product across interstate lines. We've always been opposed to that. We think it raises food safety concerns. That's why the consumer groups have always also opposed that concept. And the fact of the matter is there's a program right now, and has been in place for several years, that allows state inspected facilities to ship product in interstate commerce if their state participates and if those facilities are able and willing to meet the federal standards. We support that program 100%. In terms of the monies that might be available to allow these other facilities to, for lack of a better term, upgrade or make whatever necessary adjustments, we support that. If somebody wants to ship in interstate commerce, so long as they meet the federal standards, they should be permitted to do that. I think everybody needs to remember that, there's about 6,000 federally inspected establishments. At least 5,000 of them, maybe more, are small or very small. So this idea that, well, if I'm small, I can't meet the federal standard, that's a red herring. But no, we support that. I mean, we don't mind the company. You have to remember the Meat Institute, yes, we represent the largest companies, but our smallest member has 5 employees. And about half of our membership has fewer than 100 employees. So we run the spectrum from soup to nuts in terms of size.
What's the biggest change that's going to come out of this whole experience with the pandemic as far as the meat processing industry?
Philip, I'm not sure I have a good answer for that, because if I knew that, I'd probably bottle it, sell it, and make a lot of money. I think we will see, hopefully we learn to be more prepared for something like this. Before the pandemic, everybody was focused on animal pandemics, right? Either foot and mouth disease or African swine fever had everybody's attention. We had a young woman who just recently left us. She's a veterinarian, very, bright young woman. And she spent a lot of time working with APHIS and entities like that. And everybody was focused on what happens if we have some foreign animal disease. What would that do to the industry? And it would be, traumatic. Nobody saw this coming. At least I did. And if you can find me the person who really saw this pandemic coming, I will point out to you a unicorn. The president said something along those lines just a few weeks ago, if I remember correctly. But having not seen it coming before, it's incumbent upon us to get prepared going forward. And I think one of the things that people are looking at is, for example, when the pandemic first started, everybody worried about touching doorknobs, et cetera. Well, now we know that airflow and things like that are far more important. I know that a lot of companies are investing a great deal of money and capital in terms of improving and upgrading those systems, for example. I know there's been a lot of research done on how do we make sure that we have access to PPE, because that was a challenge early on in the pandemic. We had one company had to fly a plane to China to be able to get masks and things like that. The other thing I think is that if you look at the early days of the pandemic, to say that the meat industry was challenged, undoubtedly. I'd like to tell people we were sort of the bloody tip of the spear in some respects. But I think the other thing that people have to recognize is that once the companies were able to acquire the PPE, implement the programs that either CDC or OSHA or others, or that they developed for themselves, once those programs were put in place, our performance is pretty good. If you look at the numbers, the incidence rate for infections in federal in meat packing facilities is way lower than it was for the population at large. It was inverted early on, but once we had a chance to put things to work, we've performed pretty well. It's not perfect, but I hope that we learn how to deal with these things going forward so we are better prepared. Because some people will tell you that this isn't going to be every 100 years from now on. It's going to be every decade or every 20 years. So we need to be better prepared, and I'm sure we will be.
And sticking on that theme of kind of where things go from here, obviously this current ownership and processing structure, I think it's inarguable that there's a small amount of companies that have a large amount of the processing capacity. The current formula and the current ownership structure of packing capacity in the United States, is that a sustainable model, Mark?
Well, I think so. First of all, I think there's yes. The answer is yes. And I think so for the final reason. There is, in my view, either a misperception or some deception, depending on who you're talking to and what the topic is or who's saying it. If you go back and look at, first of all, what are commonly known as the big four, the four largest fed cattle processing facilities, yeah, they process about 82, 83%, something like that, of fed cattle. So I see everybody saying that they control 80% of beef processing. That's not true. They process they harvest about 82, 83, 85% of fed cattle, but fed cattle make up only about 79% of total cattle slaughter. So if you do the math, those four packing plants, even if you add in the cow plants that they own, account for about 70% of all cattle harvest, right? So the numbers need to be clarified in some respects. The second thing is I've seen comments about, the pandemic caused, it's not sustainable, it's not resilient. Well, if you look at look at the Fern data. The Fern data shows that there's something like 590 facilities, meat packing facilities, meat processing facilities that had COVID infections. It's probably a much higher number than that, given that there's about 6,000 facilities out there. So to highlight or to point to those large facilities as being the problem, that's not the issue. We need to figure out how to be better prepared for a pandemic, because I think this is sustainable. And I think it's a way to ensure that consumers don't pay as much for the product in the long run. I recognize right now prices are really high, but they're really high globally. There was an article yesterday about how high prices are all across the world for a variety of functions. Demand is exceptionally high, and I think this is just sort of the cycle.
Mark, we'll wrap up with this. Yesterday, we had both the chair and ranking member of the Senate Agriculture Committee both kind of saying and agreeing that some kind of a look at this industry is warranted at the committee level, sort of a fact-finding mission, if you will. Should that fact-finding mission turn into additional legislative or regulatory or oversight protocols, what should we expect NAMI's posture to be? Is this a situation where, maybe your organization has some things you'd like to address in future potential legislation as well? Or is this more of a defensive posture looking to maintain that structure that you were just talking about?
Well, the short answer is it depends on what a bill says. There are several bills out there right now that talk about cattle markets and pricing and everything else. We're obviously not in favor of the government mandating how many animals have to be purchased, etc. That takes away choice not only from the packer, but more importantly, it takes away choice for the producer. I can't speculate on what our position would be on any particular bill, but I think it's safe to say that we're not really in favor of the government inserting itself into the marketplace any more than is absolutely necessary. I think the statutes as they exist today do a pretty good job of ensuring that the markets are competitive.
Mark, most important question saved for the end here. Memorial Day weekend coming up. I understand you're a man that works for the nation's packing sector. What's on the grill over the weekend?
Well, it's going to be normally I'd say a ribeye or a New York strip, but I am also the grandson of a hog farmer.
Mm-hmm.
So there's probably going to be some room for some baby back ribs in there as well. I mean, it's 3 days, so I got options.
Can't go wrong either way. Can't go wrong
Absolutely.
either way.
Right. There you go.
Well, you and me and a lot of others will be doing quite a bit of grilling over this weekend. And obviously, as we head into that summer grilling season, a lot of folks are looking to take a look at the very structure of the system that produces some of the food that ends up on America's grills. And so, Mark, we appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us a little bit about that here today.
Happy to do it. Be well.
For Mark Dopp and Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.